Okay. So the plan today is to do the next mitzvah in our series. I'm really excited about this one. This is a fun one. Just setting up my microphone over here. Looks like we're all systems a go. Let's begin. We are up to mitzvah number 80. And today we're going to do mitzvah number 80 and 540 and 541. And this is a mitzvah that deals with what happens when you encounter your friend and they're walking with their animal, and their animal either is suffering under a burden, under a load. Alternatively, the animal needs to be loaded. And then there's a mitzvah for you to not ignore your friend, to help him load the animal, to help him unload the animal. So mitzvah number 80 is the positive mitzvah to help your friend unload the animal. Mitzvah number 540 is to not ignore your friend, meaning this is the negative, the prohibition, to not ignore your friend whose animal needs to be helped. And finally, mitzvah number 541 is to help your friend load the animal. So 80 is to unload the animal, and there's a separate mitzvah to load the animal. And adjacent to this entire discussion is the broader discussion of how the Torah mandates that we must treat animals, and we're going to talk about that at the very end. Okay, so mitzvah number 80 is the mitzvah to remove or to help your friend remove from upon their animal a load, a burden, when the animal is struggling to maintain the load. Now, the way this is framed in the verse in chapter 23 of the book of Exodus is when you see the donkey of the person you hate struggling with the load, you help the friend of yours or the enemy of yours even remove the load and resituate it, reposition it, rebalance it so that the person can continue their journey. Now, the Sefer HaChinuch, the book that we're using to guide us through the mitzvos, he takes a pause and says, wait a minute. The verse frames this as you helping your enemy. Are you allowed to have enemies? Aren't we supposed to love everyone? And this is specifically referring to another Jew. Are you allowed to hate a fellow Jew? So he tells us a side point that there's actually an instance where you are allowed to hate a fellow Jew. Namely, quotes the Talmud. Talmud says that if you see a fellow Jew doing a sin in private, and you warn them, and you try to encourage them to repent, and the person is resistant to repenting, in such an instance, you are allowed to hate a fellow Jew. And perhaps when the verse is talking about a person who has an animal who's struggling, and it's a person that you hate, maybe it's referring to a person that you are legally allowed to hate. Alternatively, it could also be referring to someone that you just don't like. You know, people that we like, people we get along with, people we're friendly with, people who are our close associates and acquaintances, people that we like. And then there's some people we just don't get along with them. We don't like them, not because of any technical halachic reason. We just are not friends with them. We dislike their personality. Something about them is irksome to us. It happens. Not everyone loves everyone naturally, and perhaps the verse is referring to that. Regardless, you have to help an individual in need unload their animal. And the verse talks about a donkey, but of course this refers to any animal. If you have a different kind of animal, a mule, a bovine of sorts, any animal that is struggling with a load, that too would be included in this mitzvah. And the reason why the Torah uses the example of a donkey, because that is what is used to transport cargo. Now, the reason for this mitzvah, I think, is quite obvious. We, of course, are here to perfect ourselves, to improve ourselves, to develop good character, to polish up our personality. We're born and we have a collection of good characteristics and bad characteristics Some parts of us are really admirable, good quality, sterling character. And of course, all of us have things that we need to fix. If we didn't have that, if we were perfect, we would be an angel and we would not be a human, and our life would have no purpose. It's the pursuit of greatness. It's the pursuit of perfection. That's why we're here. We call that, of course, free will, meaning that the human is positioned to have options, to have choices, to have different avenues, different paths you could take. One path towards self-perfection, really strengthening and buttressing the good characteristics that you have naturally, and trying to remedy the bad characteristics that you have, and steadily improve yourself and make yourself into an angel. Become someone of complete sterling character. That's option A, the advisable one. And of course, we have the other option, and that is to allow our good character to lapse, to allow the Yetzer Hara inclination to cause us to lose the good characteristics we have, and the bad characteristics, not only we don't fix them, but they become further and further entrenched, and thus a person can choose to become way worse than they were at the onset of their life, and that's why we're here. And that's the dynamic that the Almighty desired, and that's why He created the world, to make it an arena for free will to operate. The Almighty removes Himself from humanity to a certain extent. The exact extent of that, of course, is a very important and advanced question. The Almighty removes Himself, so to speak, and how that works is a very Kabbalistic question. But the Almighty frees up man to make choices. And the Torah is there as our greatest aid, as our greatest companion, to enable us to choose kindness and benevolence and goodness and righteousness and piety. It's there to nudge us down the path to become an angel, down the path of character perfection, and to avoid the pitfalls and the dangers of the Yetzer Hara. And here we see a classic example. You're busy, you're driving to work, you have an important meeting, and you see your friend who's suffering. And your instinct is, let me ignore that. Let me look away. I didn't see that. After all, we have places to go, people to meet, things to do. The Torah is telling us, no, stop what you're doing. Notice the pain of your friend, empathize with them, try to help solve their problem. That's the mitzvah. And that is an example of the Torah telling us of creating a framework wherein we will develop good character, we will fix bad character, and we will go along the path of character perfection. You're driving along the road and you see someone else with a flat tire. This is before the day of AAA or calling up Geico, roadside assistance. And you have a jack in the back of your car and you know how to do it, but it's going to take 10 minutes out of your day. What do? It's our instinct. The Yetzer Hara's preferred approach is ignore it. Drive by. You can't be blamed after all. You're not a bad person if you do that. Everyone would do it. Most people would do that. Here's the mitzvah. Stop, notice, go help. And the Sefer Chinuch tells us that this, of course, mitzvah is framed as helping your friend load and unload his animal. But of course, this would apply to someone who is themselves suffering physically. If you have to help your friend when his animal is suffering physically, certainly when someone themselves physically is suffering, you must do what you can to go aid them and assist them. And included in this, says the Sefer Chinuch, is having mercy and empathizing with someone who is distraught about a lost item. Have you ever seen this? Someone going mad, looking for their phone or their keys. Oh, missing the right shoe. Have you seen that? You have one shoe, not the other. If you don't have both, it's fine, because you assume they're together. You have one, there's a certain kind of diabolical pain of finding one shoe, not the other. So you see someone going crazy like a madman looking for their stuff. In this mitzvah, we're told to empathize with them. Go help them look for it. It is a mitzvah, or included in this mitzvah, in the Torah. Moreover, this mitzvah is framed as helping the animal. The animal's in pain. This is one of the biggest sources for the concept of what's called tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, the pain of living things. It is a mitzvah to prevent an animal from being pained, and thus when you unload the burden of the animal suffering, you are preventing the animal from being pained. And this is part of a much broader discussion that we'll talk about, please God, that a person is not allowed to cause unnecessary pain to an animal and must do whatever a person can to make the animal's pain go away. So like we said, there's a mitzvah to help your friend unload the animal. There is an additional prohibition to not ignore your friend when you see him along the way. Don't leave him there at the side and go on your way. Just continue your journey. Rather, you stop and go help them. So that's two mitzvos. If someone does ignore their friend, they have violated a prohibition, and they've also ignored a positive mitzvah. And finally, we have the third mitzvah, and that is 541, and that's to help your friend load the animal, not only to unload the animal, which of course is accomplishing multiple goals, both helping your friend and helping the animal, but also when it comes to loading the animal, that too is a separate stand-alone mitzvah. Now I want to go through some of the interesting laws related to these mitzvos, and then we'll talk more about the general idea of not causing pain to animals. So the Talmud tells us something interesting. The Talmud tells us that, are you allowed to charge for your services? And the Talmud says that when it comes to loading the animal, then you're allowed to charge for your services. So even though you were required to go help them, after all, you could have been working at your job, you could have been building your widgets, you could have been doing your services, you should get paid for that. So yes, it's a mitzvah, but it doesn't mean that you have to forfeit your income. Whereas when it comes to removing the burden from the animal, then in that instance, you must do it for free. You cannot charge for your services. And the commentaries explain that when you're unloading the animal, you're also relieving the pain of the animal. And therefore you should do it for free. Whereas when you're loading the animal, that is just a service to your friend. The animal's not benefiting. Therefore, you're providing a service to your friend. Yes, you are obligated to provide the service, but he is obligated to pay in the event that you insist on getting paid. Now, what do you do if you're driving along the way and you see not one animal, but two animals? One on the right side of the street, one on the left side of the street. Both of them need to be helped. One of the animals has a big load and is struggling with the load, and the load needs to be removed. The other animal has no load at all, but the person has the cargo and needs help to load the animal. Which one of those two must you do first? So again, you have two mitzvos, to load and to unload the animal. Which one has priority? Says the Talmud, you must unload the animal that needs to be unloaded before you load the animal that needs to be loaded. Why? The answer is obvious, because by unloading the animal, you're also relieving the pain of the animal. And we're told that we must do whatever we can to not cause pain to the animals. And therefore, when it comes to unloading the animal, you have two mitzvos, essentially, to help your friend and to relieve the pain of the animal. And therefore, it takes precedence over the mitzvah of loading the animal. So again, you're driving by, you see two cases, you unload first, and then you help your other friend load. And then the Talmud says something really fascinating. Fascinating and counterintuitive, but also very illuminating. Suppose you are going along the way and you see two animals. One animal needs to be loaded. One animal needs to be unloaded. So you told me, well, we have to unload first and then load. But there's another variable here. The person who owns the person that owns the animal who needs to be loaded is someone that you can't stand. You hate their guts. Someone that you hate. And the person whose animal needs to be unloaded is your friend, is your chum, is your buddy. Who comes first? So we would think, well, I have my buddy, and his animal needs to be unloaded. and you always unload before you load, so most certainly you help your buddy unload his animal. That's what we would think. Does the Talmud know? In an instance where it's your enemy whose animal needs to be loaded, that comes before helping your friend unload his animal. And the reason, says the Talmud, because even though you have the priority of unloading over loading, because when you unload, you help your friend and you help the animal, but there's another factor here, and that is that the primary objective of all mitzvos is to suppress the Yetzer Hara, is to fight and resist against the Yetzer Hara. That is the primary objective of mitzvos. And when you see your friend, you want to help him. And when you see your enemy, you want him to suffer. Let him suffer. Let him work hard. And that is the Yetzer Hara speaking. The Yetzer Hara, his job is to keep separation. Separate man from his mission. Separate man from his fellow. Separate man from God. And the fact that there is one person who hates another person, the Yetzer Hara is really happy about that. And he wants to do whatever he can to perpetuate that. And when you go and you see someone who you don't like so much, you really can't stand them, but they need help, and you say, I'm going to come help you now when you need it, you are mending a broken relationship. You are taking one step, one gesture towards the person that you don't stand. And you know what? Maybe tomorrow the person will reciprocate. And you know what you'll say? It's not such a bad guy. Maybe there's something redeeming about them. The act of a person helping someone they don't like is an act that's there to suppress the Yetzer Hara and to improve the relationship between these two people. And therefore, even though relative to the kind of the act itself, it's better to help the animal being unloaded than the animal being loaded, in this instance, it's different. There's another big variable, the biggest variable of them all, suppressing the Yetzer Hara, mending broken relationships, and therefore you help your enemy load his animal ahead of your friend unload his animal. And I think that this really sheds light on what the objective of mitzvos is. Mitzvos are there, like we said. The Torah mitzvos are there to make us into angels. Why are we not angels? After all, our soul, our sages tell us, is loftier than angels. So not only we should be angels, we should be even greater than angels. After all, we have a loftier soul than the angels. And the only reason why we're not so holy and so lofty and so spiritual and so beautiful, it's because of the Yetzer Hara. And therefore, the primary objective of mitzvos is to fend off the Yetzer Hara, to repulse its incursions upon man. And therefore, that always takes priority. Help your enemy load his animal ahead of helping your buddy unload his. I think this gives us a new framework of understanding what mitzvahs really are there to do broadly. Now, some more laws about this mitzvah. You don't need to go out of your way, per se, to go help your friends. You don't need to drive along the highway to see who needs to have their tire fixed. If you see your friend at a distance, who needs help, you have to go, but up to a certain point. The Talmud says it's 7.5 mil. So think about it as, maybe an hour walk or so. But more than that, you could if you want, you're not obligated. Now, what about the following case? Suppose you are a Kohen. A male Kohen is barred from entering a cemetery. You see your friend, you are a Kohen, you see your friend in a cemetery with an animal that's collapsed under a massive load. Are you allowed to enter the cemetery to go help your friend? And the answer is no. Why? Because you cannot violate one mitzvah to fulfill a different mitzvah. Under certain circumstances, maybe you would say that the mitzvah that you're going to do takes precedence over the mitzvah you're going to violate, but in this instance, you would not be obligated to do that. Another example. Suppose you are an older, dignified person, and it's not fitting for your stature and dignity to go lift cargo and move cargo and maneuver cargo and pull stuff up from the animal and on. It's just not, you're a more distinguished person. So the Talmud says that you would not be obligated to go help your friend if you yourself would not do that to your animal. Meaning, if you're someone who's so dignified, you're not going to deal with the animals. You're an older person, you're a more dignified person, distinguished person. If you wouldn't load and unload your own animals, you are not obligated to go load and unload your friend's animals. Nevertheless, if you decide out of the goodness of your heart to go above and beyond the call of duty, and you say, you know what, even though by the letter of the law, I am not obligated to go load and unload my fellow's animal because I'm so dignified, but I want to do it anyhow because it's a mitzvah, then that's a beautiful thing. You would be blessed as a result, even though it's not obligatory. The Talmud in the book of Bab Metzia, page 30b, tells us a wonderful story to this effect. It tells us of a great sage, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi. He was walking along the road, and he sees a man carrying a bunch of logs of wood on their back. And the person is schlepping it and sweating profusely. And then he takes a little rest along the way. And he collapses on the floor and drops the wood and drops the sticks. And he's relaxing, catching his breath before he keeps on going on his journey. And now it's time for him to get up and to continue his journey. So he tells the great venerated sage, would you give me a boost here? Would you lift these logs on my back? So the rabbi says to him, here's what we'll do here. How much do these things cost? What's the value of these logs? He tells him it's a half a dinar. Half of a dinar, a gold coin. She says, listen, I'll give you half a dinar, but I'm not going to help you with the logs. I'll pay for it. So we'll just leave the logs over here. I'll pay for it, and then you'll have your profit, but don't make me lift them. It's beneath my dignity. So the man says, sure, it's a deal. So he gives him the half dinar coin. And then he says, okay, now I've acquired those logs, right? The rabbis acquired those logs. He says, now I hereby declare that these logs are hefker. They're hefker. They're ownerless. So whoever wants to come could come and grab them. I bought them from you, and now I'm leaving them on the side of the road. So this guy, this enterprising individual says, it's ownerless. He quickly grabs it. He's like, now it's mine again. So he tells the rabbi, I have another request. Could you help me put these logs back on my back? So he says, here's a half dinar. So he gives him another half dinar, and he declares it ownerless. And the man grabs it again, a third time. And the rabbi says, I declare it ownerless to everyone in the world except you. I'm not going through this rigmarole again. That's the Talmud. And the Talmud concludes from this that the great sage did not need to tend to it. The great sage could have said, I'm sorry, I'm not obligated to do it because it's beneath my dignity. But he decided out of the goodness of his heart to go help the person and give him the compensation instead of the actual physical labor. And the Talmud says, well, he acted above and beyond the letter of the law. Even though he could have said, sorry, I'm not helping you, I don't need to pay you for anything, he was very righteous and he helped the person nonetheless, even though he didn't actually help him with the physical labor. Now, what about if we're dealing with a regular person? So you're helping your neighbor's trying to load and unload the animal, and you load it, and it turns out it's not the right load, you have to unload it. How many times are you obligated to help the person load and unload until it fits just right? Says the Talmud, even up to 100 times. You load it, it doesn't really fit properly, you unload it, you try again, you try again, you try again. Even 100 times, you must not abandon him. You must not let him on his own. You have to ensure that you are there to help him get the animal situated properly and loaded properly. Now, the Talmud actually even adds that after it's loaded properly, you should accompany him along his journey the length of a parsing, just to make sure that it's all fitting properly and it's not going to collapse after 100 feet. Until the owner tells you, okay, it looks like it's good, only then are you relieved of your mitzvah. Now, what if the owner's not around? You just see a random animal struggling with the weight. You would be obligated to help unload the animal, position the cargo properly, even if you don't know who the owner is. But what about if the owner is there? And the owner is a clever little individual, and he says, aha, you have a mitzvah to help me. So I'm going to go sit down under the shade. I'm going to pull out a cigarette and start smoking. And I'm going to watch you load my animal. Because after all, you have a mitzvah. What are you going to do? You have no choice. You got to help me. In that instance, the halacha is that you do not need to help that person. It's only when the owner is working alongside you, only then are you obligated to help the owner, unless the owner is old or too frail or too dignified to do it. With the exception of that, if the owner says, I'm going to twiddle my thumbs and watch you sweat, you would not be obligated to do it. Now, regarding this entire subject, the sages talk about the general concept of treatment of animals. There is a mitzvah to not cause unnecessary pain to animals, and there is a discussion as to whether or not that is of Torah-itic origin. Is that a rabbinic law? Everyone agrees it's a law. The question is actually, where does it come from? Where is it sourced? Some suggest that this mitzvah that tells us that we have to help the animal in distress, help the animal in its burden, that may be a source for this mitzvah. Now, the Talmud book of Bava, page 85a, tells us that the great Rabbi Judah the Prince had 13 years of terrible pains. He had scurvy, he had kidney stones, awful, awful pain and suffering. And the reason, says the Talmud, the reason for this is because there was an incident. What was the incident? There was a calf, so a small cow, that was being led to the slaughterhouse. And the butcher and the shochet, the ritual slaughter, was carrying this animal, taking this animal, and the animal was very, very petrified, very scared. And it went to Rabbi Judah the Prince and tried to snuggle underneath his garment to try to kind of get protection. The animal obviously had a sense that its numbers, its hours were numbered, and it was looking for protection. And it went and snuggles under the garment of the great rabbi. And the great rabbi tells the animal, you must go to be slaughtered. That is why God created you. And since the great rabbi was a little bit flippant in the lack of empathy towards the pain of the animal, that's why it was decreed from heaven that he is going to suffer physically. And for 13 years, he had miserable and horrific suffering. And the Talmud actually gives a very graphic illustration of his pain that he went through. And then 13 years later, the maidservant of Rabbi Judah the Prince was sweeping his house and found some vermin on the corner of the house. And the great rabbi says, just let the animals be. Don't cause pain to the animals. Let them stay there. And because he showed compassion to the animals, his pains went away. The Almighty decreed, okay, it's enough. He suffered enough. The pains went away. And this is an illustration of the seriousness through which we are told that we must maintain we must be empathetic to the pain of animals, even though an animal does not have free will, even though an animal is lower than man, even though we do wear leather and we do eat meat, and there's nothing ethically or halakhically wrong with that. We believe that the animals were created for our benefit. Nevertheless, we're supposed to try to develop that sense of mercy and kindness and benevolence and empathy with the pain of others, even the pain of animals. And that's the grave lesson being conveyed over here. As an aside, maybe this should be edited out of the podcast. Maybe this should be an exclusive for those of y'all that are here. I don't know, you let me know afterwards. The Kabbalists, they talk about what was actually happening in this episode of Rabbi Judah the Prince and the calf that snuggled underneath his garment. And the Kabbalists ask a question, wait a minute. A bovine, a baby calf, what do they know about what's happening? How could they possibly know that he's being led to the slaughterhouse? How could he know that? What is the meaning of this animal snuggling underneath the garments of the great Rabbi Judah the Prince? So the Kabbalists say that actually this calf contained a spark of the soul of a very righteous man. And this righteous man was reincarnated, or part of his soul was reincarnated into the animal. And there was some flaw that needed to be fixed, that was going to be fixed with this animal being led to the slaughter. This person was righteous in general, but there was something missing, and therefore part of the person's soul, whatever that means, again, this is very advanced stuff, part of the person's soul tumbled and was reincarnated into this animal, and the way it was going to be fixed, the way that spiritual flaw was going to be fixed, was via the slaughtering. And when this calf began to snuggle underneath the garment of Rabbi Judah the Prince, what this spark, this soul was actually trying to do was trying to get the great rabbi to fix the spiritual flaw in the soul, and thereby avoiding the necessity of the soul going through the process of slaughtering. How that works, I have no earthly clue, but apparently the great Kabbalists were able to discern the backstory and the history of souls, not only human souls, but even sparklets of souls, whatever that means, that were present in other things. And they're able to kind of manually fix those problems. So the great Rabbi Judah the Prince, if anyone knew how to do it, he would know how to do it. He was being requested by this soul, come fix my problem so I could avoid going through the process of being slaughtered. And of course, Rabbi Judah the Prince understood that. And he said to the soul, wait a minute, if in heaven they decided that you must be reincarnated into this calf, so you should suffer whatever pain you suffer via the slaughtering to fix the flaw, who am I to intervene? And maybe that was the flaws, or that was the actual spiritual background of that episode, even though, of course, on the surface, it seems like Rabbi Judah the Prince is not showing compassion for the animal. Maybe there's something deeper going on, as the Kabbalists suggest. And of course, we don't know anything about reincarnation or how this works or sparklets of souls. We don't know anything about that, but it is very interesting. And when I saw this last night, I said, you know what? This is something which is really interesting. Maybe we'll leave it in the podcast, and whoever listens all the way to the end will be able to get a little dose of interesting commentary. Okay, so we have this concept to not cause any pain to animals. However, there is a very important principle, and that is that man comes first. Whenever there's a question of the agenda of man conflicting with the agenda of the animal, we believe that man is higher on the spiritual totem pole, and therefore, in the hierarchy of value of creations, man is above animal. So we have to do whatever we can to help the animal. If we see an animal distress, we try to save it. If we must cause pain to the animal, we make it as minimal as possible. But if there is an instance where it's our interest or even our comfort conflicting with the life of the animal, we're even allowed to kill the animal. So there's no halakhic problem to kill bugs and mosquitoes, for example, unless it's Shabbos. That would be a violation of Shabbos. Smashing spiders with shoes, an activity that we have to do a lot here in Canada in this little cottage / cabin that we're in. Crawling with spiders, you got to always smash them with the slippers. That's okay. Why? Because if it is a nuisance to you, your comfort takes priority. Pest control, completely permissible, not a problem. Now, hunting for sport, is that okay? So there's a very famous responsa written by the Noahides Yehuda. The Noahides Yehuda was one of the great rabbis of recent centuries. And someone said, are you let to go hunt for sport? So you're going to shoot animals and you're not even eating them. It's not like you're eating them, trapping them, eating them. It's not like you're benefiting from them in a tangible way, but you're enjoying the experience. It's part of the sport. Is that okay? So he says unequivocally, the prohibition against causing pain to animals is only when there's no benefit for you. But to kill the animals, to shoot the deer, whatever it is, for sport, you are benefiting from it. You're getting pleasure out of it. And therefore, it's okay, halakhically. However, he concludes, the whole thing is mysterious to me. In the Torah, the only hunters we find are Esav and Nimrod, two of the villains, of course, in the story. And this is not the ways of the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's saying it's not a Jewish pastime. This is not a Jewish pastime. We can find better ways to spend our time than this, but technically it would be permissible. A few more interesting laws. The Talmud tells us that you are not allowed to eat before you feed your animals. So suppose you have a pet, or you have a farm with some animals, you must feed your animals before you eat yourself. And quotes a verse, you first give grass in the field for your animals, and only then do you eat, and you are satiated. So this is, again, a similar idea that we must show compassion for the animals, and we must develop our own character. And if you have an animal that you're in charge of, that you are tending to, that you are a steward over, you must feed the animal before you yourself eat. Again, the sages tell us that for your own benefit, you can indeed use the animal. So another example given here is if you need a quill, you're allowed to pluck feathers off an animal, not a problem. It causes pain, but you know what? It causes pain to the animal, but you know what? For your benefit, it is okay. But to cause any unnecessary pain for an animal, to tie the legs of an animal together in a way that causes them pain, to force a bird to sit on edge of a different species, that would be considered prohibited. The Sefer Chinuch, the book that we're using to guide us through the mitzvos, in mitzvah number 451, please God, we'll get to it soon, the mitzvah of slaughtering an animal to make it kosher, he points out that the way kosher slaughtering is done actually kills the animal very fast and minimizes the pain of the animal. And part of the mitzvah, part of the idea behind the mitzvah, the way we're supposed to process it, is that we're not going to cause unnecessary pain for the animal, and that's perhaps the reason why they might have told us to slaughter it in that particular fashion. In addition, there's another mitzvah related to this, and that is the prohibition against muzzling an animal as it is plowing. If you have an animal that's plowing your field, of course, there's fruits, there's vegetables, vegetation there. You're not allowed to muzzle the animal as it's plowing. You have to allow it to munch along some of the produce along the way as it is plowing. One final point that I want to stress, and that is the question of vegetarianism. What is the Torah's perspective on vegetarianism? The answer is, it is totally fine. There is only one instance where you would be required to eat meat as a mitzvah, and that is the question of sacrifices. If we have a temple rebuilt, please God, we'll have it rebuilt, and we'll restore sacrifices. Every year comes along Pesach, and every Jew is required to eat the equivalent of an olive's volume of the Korban Pesach, the paschal offering, and therefore it's a mitzvah from the Torah to eat from that animal, and that would be the one mitzvah that mandates the consumption of meat. Besides for that, or certainly today in our world, there's no mitzvah to eat meat. If you want to be a vegetarian, no problem whatsoever. In fact, my grandfather, blessed memory, he himself was a vegetarian. However, to say that someone is a vegetarian because of ethical reasons is a philosophical misnomer. Because again, like we said earlier, we believe that the Almighty created the world for us. The purpose of creation is fulfilled by humanity, not by the angels who are more lofty spiritually than us, not by the animals who are less lofty spiritually than us, for us. And the angels and the animals and everything, the entire arena of the world is there to service us. And the animals are there to service us. We are the purpose of creation, not them. And therefore, the Almighty gave us animals, gave us a cow. Why? To mow the lawn, to give us leather, to give us succulent beef. That's why cows were created, for our benefit. We can use it for our pleasure. We can eat them, no problem. So again, there's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian, but when someone is a vegetarian because they don't want to cause pain to animals, or who am I to eat the animal, that conflicts with our understanding of creation and the fact that not all creations are created equal. Humanity is the purpose of creation. Adam is the purpose of creation. A human bearing free will is the purpose of creation, and nothing else. And therefore, if the animals there to service us, we can enjoy it, and there's no ethical problem of consuming it, of wearing leather, of wearing fur. It's not a problem whatsoever. You want to be vegetarian because of health reasons or something, that you happen to not like meat, not a problem. Enjoy your quinoa and kale while the rest of us are binging on steaks. No problem. Get your protein. Enjoy your tofu. This is probably something else I'll have to edit out of the podcast because no problem whatsoever. Just don't assume that is ethically in line with what the Torah says. Okay, so that's mitzvah number 80, 540, 541. The mitzvah to load and to help. The mitzvah to help your friend load and unload the animal, and the prohibition against ignoring that. And more broadly, we spoke about Torah's perspective on treating animals with respect and not causing them any pain, unnecessary pain, and the understanding of the relationship, so to speak, between humans and the creation and the other creations in the world, and how the Almighty designed it all to operate. I thank you for listening. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. Rabbi is spelled with two B's, so rabbit minus the T. Wolbe is WOLB as in Buster, as in boy, as in bravo. E as in echo @gmail.com. Of course, you know that I work for Torch, torchweb.org. Check out all the amazing podcasts that we have. Parsha Podcast has just completed an entire cycle of the weekly Parshas, Jewish History Podcast, Torah 101. Enjoy all of them. Ethics Podcast, Jewish Life, amazing stuff that we have for you at Torch. Thank you for listening. Until next time, this was tons of fun. And of course, I'm opening the floor for questions. I assume we'll have some of them.
Thank you, Rabbi, for that. I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Nicholas.
So the ending part was really interesting. So I have a friend who's a vegan, well, a vegetarian. And the reason that this person wants to go vegetarian or is vegetarian is because this person doesn't agree with the way the animals are slaughtered.
Okay.
So it's the process, not really the slaughtering itself. Is there any Jewish view on this? Like, should we eat meat even if the animal, if the animal wasn't killed properly?
You're asking from a halachic perspective?
Um, I guess so, but also something that applies to non-Jews.
Oh, yes. So if a non-Jew would not be required to eat kosher, would a non-Jew be obligated? I think that would be optional for them. They could choose if they want. They could choose to have kosher. A lot of non-Jews eat kosher just because the kosher, we know, if the animal is found to have all kinds of cancerous lesions, lesions, that is, not legions, lesions, they just dump it in the non-kosher pile, right? So a lot of non-Jews or people that are not kosher in general for religious reasons prefer the kosher because it's just better quality meat and the like. So maybe that would be a good solution to your friend. Again, there's no obligation to do it. There's no obligation to eat meat, with the exception of sacrifices.
Thank
So
you.
that's what I would tell your friend. I'll tell your friend, he doesn't want, if he wants to, if he thinks the animal's not being treated well, have kosher. There's nothing wrong with a non-Jew eating kosher.
Yeah,
Rabbi, can I follow up with that
thanks.
on
Yes.
Nicholas's question? Because his question actually prompted a thought I've long held, is that knowing some of the practices in industrial processing and even in the lifespan, it sounds less than ideal. It sounds abusive, or could be construed as abusive. And so from that perspective, and maybe you already did answer this, but just zeroing in on that, if you know the practices in general in the society, it seem abusive to the animal, that they suffer, that they're deprived of a basic life, a decent life, then do you have an obligation?
Again, so I would separate those two. I would say abusive is different than being deprived of a decent life. To me, those two things are different. Abusive, causing unnecessary pain to animals, to me, that's a problem. And by the way, I will note that even the 7 Noahide laws has a prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal, right? Why would someone eat a limb from a living animal? Because think about it, in antiquity you didn't have refrigeration, so what do you do if you don't want to eat an entire cow? You just chop off the leg and eat that, and the rest of the animal still lives. But that's even for non-Jews prohibited, right? Because that's just maybe one of the reasons for it. Maybe there's other reasons for it, but one of the reasons perhaps is the fact that there's an animal now hobbling around because you want to have fresh meat. It's just cruel, right? So I would separate the abuse and the cruelty to animals from the fact that believing the animal has to have a good life. No, I would say the animal is there to service humanity. It's not my job to make the animal have a life. And there's some poodles that have better lives than 98% of humanity, right? That's a nice thing. You can have a pet and you could pamper your pet, not a problem. But on a principle scale, I don't think the Torah believes that we have to give the animals a good life. Now, there's a difference in that and cruelty and abuse towards animals. That would be a violation. So where the line between abuse and cruelty lies is maybe a discussion we could have. To keep a chicken cooped up in a little box, is that good? Is that bad? Or veal, for example. Veal, you want to keep the animal constricted because that's what makes it the tastiest, I guess. Is that cruelty, or is that you doing what you can to make better meat for humans to enjoy? So that's the exact line between those two, I think, is what we have to figure out. But we don't believe that it is obligatory from the Torah's perspective to make sure the animal has it easy. No, the animal's there to service us. It's there to service us. Now, they do sell like free range chicken and grass-fed beef. And there's also an understanding that if the animal, is treated better, it's actually going to be more nutritional for you. So there is this idea, you've heard of that, right? That the animals it absorbs less chemicals, and it's free range, so maybe it's healthy, or it's plumpier, it's more nutritious. So there is that idea, and maybe that would be a solution as well. Again, for someone who's not obligated to keep kosher, maybe that would be a good choice for them. And you see that there is a very robust industry for that. So. Good discussion, good questions. Who's next?
I have a question, Leslie.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
This question's not related exactly to treatment and everything like that. It's about animals. Jewish people, or is it said that we should be having pets? Some people have dogs, some people have cats, or anything like that. Is that?
Not a problem. Not a problem. Dogs and cats, not a problem.
Obviously, you treat them with respect and.
I don't know anyone. Is there any pet owners that treat their animals without respect? Pet owners love their pets. Not a problem. That's not a problem.
Rabbi,
Yes.
you did a good advertisement for everything that you do, except for, what about your book?
Oh, the book is coming out. The book is coming out. I sent in all the stuff. It's now the publisher has everything they need. It's coming out. I'll keep everyone posted about it. Thank you so much for bringing that up. You know what? I always say that the making a podcast, I have a microphone, I have my recording stuff, I have my editing software. I can do it all myself. Publishing a book, I just can't do it all myself. I can't. So it's in the hands of others. What could you do? They say that writing a book is a pleasure, but publishing it is a nightmare. Is that true? I don't know, because I found that writing it was also pretty hard. But I certainly, relative to writing it, publishing it is it's a very tricky process. Whatever.
Well, if you're after perfection in writing the book, it is going to be more difficult.
Yeah. I don't even know why I wrote it. Like I felt like I was just so compelled to do it, It's the amount of pain that goes into writing a book like this, I don't think it's justified. Well, again, it's not yet published, so we'll have to see. But I suspect that I felt like this, like I have to do it, and it's weird because I didn't have to do it, but I just felt like I was like morally obligated to do it.
Rabbi, I missed that you were publishing a book. What's it called? What's it about?
What is it? The name, the title is Upon a 10-Stringed Harp. Upon a 10-Stringed Harp, which is based on a verse in Psalms.
Okay.
Psalms talk about praising God upon a 10-stringed harp.
Thank you.
That is the title. That's the final title. I did toy with other titles. It's a maddening thing to write a title, but it's done. And why exactly, you'll have to read in the introduction. Why is that the appropriate title for it? It's about how Torah and Mitzvos transform a person and make the person more spiritual. It's not about Mitzvos themselves or spirituality themselves. It's about the process. What is the interaction with Mitzvos and a person's soul and a person's Yetzirah, and how all those parts shift and move with Torah Mitzvos. That's the general subject.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who's next?
Rabbi, I have a comment and then a question.
Okay.
When you were talking about the person who felt to do something was beneath his dignity,
Yes.
made me think of Abraham when he was getting ready to take Isaac to offer him. It says he woke early that morning and saddled his own donkey.
That's
and
right.
Commentary says that was something that typically a servant would do, but he was so anxious to do what he was commanded to do. So made me think of that this most dignified person did not feel like that was beneath him.
Right, but then Rashi there even says that was out of the ordinary.
Yes.
It was such an unusual thing because he didn't typically do that. Typically, it wasn't fitting for him.
Yeah.
And Rashi says that love just corrupts the normal order of things. And of course, and Bilam did the opposite, right? Bilam was so motivated by hate. He himself did the same exact thing.
Yeah.
He mimicked Abraham, but on the flip side, because the hate was so corrosive and so destructive, and it also corrupted the ordinary course of things.
It looked like he may have had love for money, though.
Yes, definitely.
And then my question about Judah the Prince.
Yes.
He, on the Kabbalistic level, he understood that the soul or spark of the soul, why it was in that calf and why that calf needed to be slaughtered. So then why was he subject to all this pain for 13 years if he understood that?
Well, the answer is that he's being judged on a much higher level than us. And maybe he didn't show, even though maybe he made the right calculation and the decision was correct, but the way he was maybe a little bit too dismissive of the person's pain and lack of empathy, maybe seemingly that would be the problem. That it's not like the verdict was incorrect, but the way he treated the person in pain was incorrect, or the thing in pain, whatever that was. If it was the animal, if it was the soul, the sparkling of the person, whatever it is, that would be the problem. And again, for us, we're judging on a totally different level of Judah the Prince. Instead of Judah the Prince, it's clear this is one of the most spectacular people of all time. Talmud says that he was so holy that his hands in his entire life never went beneath his belt. So his hands were kind of never near his, his reproductive organs. Talmud is that one example, never in his entire life. That's the example of how holy he was. But again, he wrote the Mishnah. The Talmud says that since the days of Moses, there was never someone who had that same collection of abilities as Judah the Prince. Only someone like of this Mosaic stature could possibly do what he did. So it did a totally different class. So the fact that his decision might have been accurate, he's being judged very, very finely.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Moses because
Nicholas is asking, how did he tie his shoes?
thing. Why is he punished for just striking a rock? So yeah.
Nicholas, he had slip-ons, moccasins. I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe he had a servant tie it for him. He was the wealthiest Jew, and might be the wealthiest person in the whole world. Him together with oh, sorry, that was a direct message, so no one saw that. But how did he tie his shoes was the question that was asked. Yeah, so you were correct, Sandy. Like Moshe is being treated with a different standard, right? A different standard that than everyone else. That he hit the rock. What did he do wrong? Nobody even figured. Like, what did he do wrong? What's so bad about that, right? It's a mystery to us, but that's Moshe, different level, being treated at a very different level. If it is even the slightest hint of any flaw in any level, any degree, any element of his behavior, it's automatically amplified. God says, you don't believe me. That's it. You don't have any faith in God. That's Moshe. Everyone's judged on an individual scale. This was so much fun. I'm so glad we had this opportunity to chat with you all together today. Sorry about last week. I hope we partially made up for it. Partially. But please, God, we'll meet again next week. Yeah? Okay, everyone, take care, stay safe. Best regards to all. And we'll see you guys, please, God, next week. Okay, take care.